Crikey, these talks are good, aren't they? It's so good. I've been enjoying and relaxing up until now. So if anyone's got that word that Sarah had talked about that gives calm, if you could shout it out, that would be really, really good. So mine is a very, very personal talk. Very personal talk. When Aryajaya asked me, talk very personally about going forth, I thought, okay, what am I going forth from? What am I going forth to? And she asked the question, and what was a pivotal moment in that? So what happened in my mind then were images. So images came up. So I'm just going to hang it around images. I'm going to try to do it fairly quickly because we're going to go over time, aren't we? But anyway, hopefully we can get there. Yeah. So the first image that came up for me in terms of going forth from was an image that derived from a talk that Parami gave a very scarily long time ago now at Taraloka. And she said something like, never be corralled into believing that there's nothing more than this. Then there's nothing more than your current conditions, than however you feel constrained and not free. So I loved that image. I loved the image of the corralling. In my mind, it was the capturing, the enclosure of horses, particularly. For me, a horse sort of it embodies for me that consciousness precedes matter. It looks like that sort of quivering energy embodied into flesh, into movement, into alertness. It kind of holds that for me. So when I imagine that sort of corral, these energies being constrained, it's very, very powerful for me, a very, very powerful image. So that's the image, that's the going forth from the corral that Parami brought up in that talk many, many years ago now. So what was the nature of my particular conditioning? What were my sort of major corralling going on? So I think about it in terms of a lifetime's unfolding. And in this particular lifetime for me, a major corralling factor was my mum's mental health, really. My mum suffered. She suffered a lot, and that manifested in anxiety and paranoia and all sorts of things, and violence and drinking and things like that. So I have a very, another image, a very vivid image of being corralled. I was about 6 years old or something. I was like those horses, I had a lot of energy. I was moving all of the time. There was a lot of energy. I was out, I was on my bike, I was climbing trees, I was running around, all of that. And it was raining, and I couldn't be outside. Couldn't be doing any of that. So I danced. I'd always danced. As soon as I was physically able, I danced. So I was dancing, and I was flinging my arms around and all that. Very, very free, small child, very, very free. And my hand caught an ornament that was on the mantelpiece, and the ornament fell. It smashed. My mum lost control. There was lots of blood. Lots of violence, still have a scar. And in some ways, that, I think, predicated the whole of my spiritual life. I was wanting to get back to the freedom of that child, the freedom in the dance before that corralling happened. So that's the sort of flavor of it, if you like. That's what I was going forth from. I had a sense there was more. I always had a sense. I had a little tiny bike. I was about 3. I learned to ride my bike. And I remember learning to ride my bike, moving away actually from my mum at a little bit of speed, probably not a lot of speed. But I just had this sense of, yay, freedom. You know, I had that. And I was very fascinated by the supernatural. Anything beyond, anything out with, beyond that corral, I was fascinated by. I was deeply religious from very, very young, actually. It does feel like an unfolding it's beyond me, actually, to be honest. So I got into evangelism, I got into Catholicism, all this sort of stuff. But that got a bit corralling as well. As soon as I hit puberty, sex with girls, nah, that wasn't a good, that was a no-no. So that became corralling, went beyond that as well. I had this vision of evolution as a kid, which was that every living being evolved until they had ultimate knowledge. That's the sort of terminology that I had then, but I said everything from sort of like amoeba all the way up until they became a being with ultimate knowledge. So I had this sense of beyond, of a going forth and a beyond after that. Yeah. So I left home to study, as many of us do. I don't think my mental states were great at that point. I think I was very corralled internally, although I was out with those external conditions. I wrote down every penny I spent, for instance. There was a real tightness, that I'd internalized. So I helped myself to free up a bit by drinking a lot. That was good. It was helpful. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of covers that period quite well. And I don't regret that. Particularly, I think I'm going very fast here. I'm aware of time, but particularly, I think the dance scene in the 90s and taking E and stuff, it did open up a different sense of consciousness. It did allow more connection, more open. I remember dancing just full of love in a heaving room with hundreds of people, and that was a far cry, from that conditioning that I'd had. So I think as a mid-step in going forth, it was really useful, actually, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll phase. I also got into being in the wilds on my own with my tent, climbing mountains, solitude, all that sort of stuff. That wild energy with space to breathe, that was really, really important. So I was beginning to taste freedom, and I started to dream differently. So I started to have thematic dreams around skating, actually, at that point. It was, skating freely, just that sense of movement, of absolutely unobstructed, limitless movement was skating. So I had these dreams every so often about skating at that point, like that young adulthood. And then I met the Dharma, not a lot of time to go into that, but I did sort of two things. I felt I'm at home, this is what I've always thought, and also I was completely on fire, completely and utterly on fire. So I meditated every day. From then on, meditation's been really important. Again, not this talk, perhaps, but there was an organic transformation going on, and it was very, very organic. The next image that I have was, I was with neighbours next door to where I lived, and we were very close. We were very good friends. They had kids. The kids used to go to bed. We would smoke joints, things like that, just hang out. And I just at one particular evening of this, I just said no thanks. So the joint was passed and I just said no thanks, And I know that was a pivotal moment. I can still see it, I can still feel it. I didn't know I was going to say it. I've never done any drugs since then. And no one had sort of talked to me about precepts. No one had kind of, gone down the line of this would be a good idea, no advice, nothing like that. But what happened was, my meditation experiences dictated very straightforwardly in a bodily sense that this wasn't in alignment. This way of being wasn't in alignment with that. So I simply stopped it. I just said no thanks, and that was the end of that. So that was a sort of more volitional side, I suppose, from this kind of unfolding that was going on a different level, I think. So from that point, my lifestyle did change, actually. So I naturally knew it wasn't aligned with this new sense of freedom that I was finding in meditation. So I stopped it, basically. So I started dreaming. The dreams changed a little bit. I started dreaming about, dancing in the sky and various sort of manifestations of sometimes leaving, sometimes starting to dance on earth and then leaving and then being in the sky, and so on and so forth. I created my own red shrine room. In recognition, actually, of my love of the old shrine room at Taraloka. I don't know if people remember that. There used to be a totally red shrine room at Taraloka. So I had a shrine room in the house, so I just did, everything was red in it. And so I meditated in there, and I saw a winged horse, actually, at one point, back to the horses. So again, images of freedom coming through into consciousness. And then I did Mitra study, as we do, and a Mitra study teacher did 5 rhythms dancing, and the night clashed, so the nights changed from the Mitra study and the 5 rhythms class. And she said, well, I'm not going to not dance, so you can come with me if you want. So I went there. So I found a sort of context, a sort of pro-social structured context for this dance that allowed my wild energy to manifest even more deeply and thoroughly. Yes, I'm doing that. I'm doing it out in the wilds, feeling freedom that way. I was on retreat again at Taraloka, and I had a relationship with Padmasambhava by that point. Tara had rejected me. I liked curvy Tara a lot, but she didn't like me. So anyway, I was restricted in dates that I could go on retreat because I was working in a school pattern at that time. So I ended up in a Padmasambhava retreat. Didn't know who that was, didn't know anything about that. But I found myself outside, like daubing structures with red paint and really feeling let down that it wasn't blood, a bit pissed off that it wasn't blood, that I didn't have skulls, so there was something happening there. So from then I had this kind of relationship with Padmasambhava that's bubbling up. But on this particular retreat, we were meditating a lot. It was a meditation retreat. And I just had this image of this deep blue, muscled being with a line, a fierce lion's face, dancing, sort of above me, I suppose, and slashing down at any constraints, any change, really slashing at these. And I felt a bit conflicted because I was like, well, this isn't Padmasambhava, is it? What's going on? But there was a real deep heart connection to this being. So I looked this being up afterwards in Vasantra's book, and I saw a picture of this being, and it was Singamukha, who is the Dakini form of Padmasambhava. So it was all good. It was all coming together. There was no conflict. So that was really good. And then another sort of one of these beyond tasting of freedom, when I made my way to the Kuti at Akashavana, I just felt everything sort of sliding off me, and I was just in tears. I was just weeping and weeping. It was like everything, all of that was just dropping away. All this sort of conditioning and constraints were dropping away. And actually, when I got into the Kuti, Parami was like, I can't ordain you yet, can I? You're in a mess. So I had to sort of stop, I had to stop for a bit until I could stop weeping and actually vocalize what I needed to vocalize in that situation. So all of this was coming together, more and more tastes of freedom going on. I'm gonna cut quite a bit actually. So within that there was a sense of moving from needing to initially shrink and to hide and to defend a very, very narrow, defended, fixed little self, tiny self, to a self that needed to escape, to intoxicate, to seek and grasp pleasure. And then a slightly more healthy self, not quite as crazy, but a self that kind of needed to be right, to be understood, to be affirmed. And then we all have glimpses, don't we? We all have glimpses. That's why we're here. It's one of the reasons why we're here. To a self that on a very good day, in very good conditions, can kind of let go of the push and pull of the basis of storying, of selfing, basically, and have that freedom. And actually to be able to fall into the sky and to dance unobstructedly and without limitation. So I think I will end there, but with a poem. So that's the beyond. So that's a beyonding, if you like. That's a beyonding that's going on. And just to capture that and finish us up, I'm going to read a poem called Time for Serenity, Anyone, by William Stafford. So I like to live in the sound of water, in the feel of mountain air. A sharp reminder hits me. This world still is alive. It stretches out there, shivering, towards its own creation, and I'm part of it. Even my breathing enters into the elaborate give and take, this bowing to sun and moon, day or night, winter, summer, storm, still. This tranquil chaos, that seems to be going somewhere. This wilderness with a great peacefulness in it, this motionless turmoil, this everything dance. Thank you.